Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país. Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país.
Canelones es trabajo que nos lleva al bienestar. Canelones es impulso que no para de innovar. Canelones tradiciones que invitan a celebrar. Canelones es ejemplo de vivir en libertad.
Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país. Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país.
Canelones es su costa que te invita a desandar. Canelones es el verde que te da toda su paz. Canelones es la vida que te llama a disfrutar. Canelones es tu pausa, bienvenido a descansar.
Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país. Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país.
Canelones es respeto por nuestra diversidad. Canelones es orgullo de su gente sin igual. Canelones tiende puentes hacia la felicidad. Canelones es tu casa, bienvenido a vivir más.
Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país. Ese lugar que soñamos es aquí, tierra querida, pequeño gran país.
La innovación y el desarrollo de Canelones. Participan el ingeniero agrónomo Gustavo Grobocopatel, el profesor Spangenberg, especialmente venido de Australia, el expresidente José Mujica y el director general de la FAO, Lito Lubdekin. El anfitrión será el intendente de Canelones, Yamandu Orsi, que es actualmente el presidente de Ciudades Intermedias y la Red de Sistemas Agroalimentarios de la FAO.
We're in Canelones, the department of Uruguay, the department that produces the most amount of food in Uruguay. On this day, on World Food Day,
nuestra consigna
our
es
objective
innovar
is to
para la soberanía y la
innovate
seguridad
for
alimentaria.
sovereignty and
Para eso contamos
innovation
con
for food.
los
And
invitados
for
que ya
that,
fueron
we
presentados,
have
pero
two very
quisiéramos
special guests,
empezar esta
and we would like to
conversación
start this conversation
en un contacto con quien fuera
talking to
integrante y
the
secretario del
person who
gabinete de
was
la FAO hasta hace poco y
secretary
hoy
of the
director regional
chamber
para
of
América
FAO
Latina y el
until
Caribe
today,
de la FAO.
and today he's the
Mario
chair.
Lubensky,
We
desde
have
donde
Mario
estés,
Lubensky, wherever you are.
Quisiéramos
We would like
conectarnos
to
contigo. Mario, ¿dónde
talk
es que
to
estás
you.
hoy?
Mario, where are you today? Well, right now, I'm in Rome, although my background is from my office in Chile. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for inviting me to this event. Also, the chair of the Network of Intermediate Cities and Agri-Food Systems, which is conducted together with FAO. I'm referring to Shamandu Orsi. Also, my regards to the panelists, to the former president, Jose Mujica, also, who have all helped to increase in Latin America and around the world. They've helped to raise awareness on food sovereignty. Today is World Food Day, as you said, Shamandu, and it's exactly the same day of the birth of FAO, 1945, and that's why we have this combination of dates. Since Friday, we started many events, such as the one that you are organizing today in Canelones. But we've done events all around the world to reflect on the situation and the future of innovation for food sovereignty and about food security. I think you're going to give us some very important comments today. And the trend is quite negative, I should say. The difficult situation that we already had before COVID-19 has worsened. Today, we're seeing the post-COVID situation, and it's even worse. Also, military conflicts have aggravated the situation, what we see today with the war from Russia-Ukraine. We have 880 million people who are suffering from hunger. 3 million people are not able to have sustainable, balanced food per day. We also have obesity in the world. So we have problems with food, we have malnutrition, and Latin America is part of this. Because while this continent, Latin America and the Caribbean, could produce food for more than 2 billion people, today we have more than 56 million people in our region who suffer from hunger, which is 8.6% of the population of the region, and 40% of the regional population. It has millions of people who have food insecurity. And if we think about children, 7.7% of children are obese. Also, 24% of adults are obese, with all the negative consequences this has on health and on the economy of the countries of the region. The increase in the prices of food that we are seeing in the recent months, especially of fertilizers, and the difficulties to have access to this. Also, the difficulties in knowing what's going to happen with the crops and the harvests in areas of war. All of this can bring lack of access to the food from next year. And this is something we must consider. That's why we need to act right now. That's why your conversations will be very important. We must act now, right now. We have to work in this regard. And for us, it is essential to focus on transforming agri-food issues. So we need to increase agricultural production, we need to have neutral carbon, we have to increase public public accounts also for this. We need to have an increase in the state accounts for this. We have to help all areas of poverty. We must talk about equality, gender equality, and the diversity and diversification of production and the increase of value added. It's important to redirect the expenses of the governments towards research, innovation, adaptation to climate change, and reduce also the losses of food, as was said on Friday by Pope Francis in his speech in the city of Rome. And we must also declare war on junk food. We must promote the open markets, open world markets. We must increase lines of credit and improve them also for local markets, as you have in Canelones. It's important especially to support small and medium-sized farmers and also fishermen, which is a very important source of production in our country. In sum, Mr. Mayor, we must transform the agro-food production that we have, and we must have greater efficiency and resilience to improve the social and well-being and the environment of our people. As Pope Francis said, the poor, those who suffer hunger, cannot be seen only as figures or only as information or only as statistics. That is why, because of this, we, with all our discussions throughout all these days celebrating World Food Day, cannot leave anybody behind. And that must be our commitment. Nobody can be left behind. And for that, governors and government authorities must act. We must work together with the private sector, civil society, the academy. We believe that we can still do it. We can achieve this, but for this, we must act very quickly. Good luck with your debate. Thank you.
Gracias, Mario.
Thank you, Mario.
Crisis alimentaria,
Food crisis,
escasez de alimentos
lack of food,
o desperdicio de alimentos,
or loss of food,
cambio climático,
climate change,
crisis ambiental,
environmental crisis,
deterioro.
deterioration of the environment, poverty. In Uruguay, we're talking about the pots on the street, feeding people who don't have food. We have hundreds of Uruguayans suffering from hunger. And with all of these challenges ahead of us, we want to talk about innovation for food sovereignty in order to improve our situation. And for this, we have as guests three very important people. They are points of reference wherever they act. We believe that this innovation, all of this knowledge, all of this change that Mario was referring to, with regards to the systems, we must have access to all. Nobody must be left behind, as he said. The small and medium-sized farmers, we must also give them the knowledge. Some time ago, I met a person who decided to live in Uruguay and told me that when he came to Uruguay, he would listen to our typical music. As a music lover, we like to listen to Lábano Carrero, whom he referred to, and then we have Gustavo Grobocapel, who's an agronomist and has dedicated a lot to food and the production of food. And we think that today we want to know a little bit about his experience. So let's hear about him.
Es ingeniero agrónomo por la
Gustavo
Facultad de
Goboca-Patel
Agronomía de la
is an
Universidad de Buenos
agronomist
Aires,
from the School of
donde también fue
Agronomy at the
docente en
University of
manejo y
Buenos
conservación
Aires, where
del
he was
suelo.
also a professor in
Estudió sobre
soil
los sistemas de
management and
producción
conservation.
europeos y la
He
agricultura
studied
en la
European production
Universidad de
systems and
Iowa,
agriculture
Estados
at the
Unidos.
University of Iowa,
Actualmente en
USA,
Argentina,
and is
es
currently a
miembro del
member of
Consejo
the
Económico y
Social and
Social de la
Economics
Universidad
Council in
Torcuato Di
Argentina
Tella,
of the
miembro
Torcuato
del
Di Tella
directorio de Endeavor
University.
y
He's a
secretario
board
de la
member
Cámara
of
Argentina de
Endeavor,
Biotecnología.
secretary of the
En
Argentine
Brasil,
Chamber of
es miembro del Consejo
Biotechnology.
Internacional
In
de la
Brazil,
Fundación
he's a
Don
member
Cabral.
of the International
Junto a Bioceres,
Council of the Don
desarrolló
Cabral
el cultivo
Foundation.
HB4,
And together with
resistente a la sequía.
Bioceres, he developed
Desde hace
HB4
años,
wheat
colabora
resistant to
activamente con su
drought.
experiencia en
For
países
years,
de
he has
África y
actively
Europa
collaborated with his
Oriental.
experience in
Estas son
African
algunas
and Eastern
distinciones y
European
reconocimientos
countries.
que ha recibido.
These are some of his
Premio
awards and
Domingo
honors.
Sarmiento
Domingo
por sus
Sarmiento
aportes a la
Award
comunidad
for
e
his
instituciones
contributions to the
otorgado
community
por
and
el Senado de la
institutions,
Nación Argentina.
awarded by the
Premio
Argentine
Ingeniero
Senate.
Agrónomo
The José María
por la
Bustillo
Academia Nacional
Agronomist
de
Award
Veterinaria
from the
y
National
Agronomía,
Veterinary and
condecoración
Agronomy
Orden de
Academy.
Río Branco,
Order
de la
Medal of
Embajada
Rio
de Brasil
Branco
en
from the
Argentina.
Brazilian Embassy in Argentina.
Gustavo.
Gustavo, hello.
Buenas tardes, un gran gusto estar
Good
aquí,
afternoon. It's a pleasure to
compartir con
be
ustedes
here and to share with
estos
you
admirados
and with these
compañeros de panel
very
algunas
admired
reflexiones sobre el tema que nos
panelists
toca.
to talk a little bit about this subject.
Pero para empezar a hablar
And to start
sobre el presente y el
talking
futuro, me
about the
gustaría
present
hacer
and
una
the
reflexión
future,
sobre
I would
de
like
dónde
to
venimos, qué fue lo que pasó en
reflect
este tiempo.
on where we come from, what has happened in these
Y,
times.
bueno, en el principio el hombre vivía
At first, man
para
would
comer.
live
Prácticamente
only
el 100% del tiempo,
to
lo
eat.
dedicaba a procurarse
He
la comida.
dedicated nearly his full day on trying to obtain food. Then he became an agronomist, he started doing agriculture, and then he realized that he could have easier access to food, so he started dedicating more time to thinking to how to develop these food systems better, and he started living in communities. Food is nothing new. This has come back throughout humanity, all times. It created revolutions, transformations, it created a lot of anguish. And there was a time when a very important economist, Malthus, he had produced a catastrophe with food because he said that the population was going to grow in a logarithmic way while food was going to grow in a linear way. Happily, this didn't happen, and what we see with those curves is how the two upper curves grew, which is food production, versus the red line, which is the growth of the population. So we're very lucky that what he said did not happen, but on the contrary, every day we saw more production of food. However, these are the deaths in different decades because of hunger. And we can see that until the 1970s, the deaths due to hunger were very high, very large figures. We also know the suffering of a lot of people who suffered hunger but did not die. These are not reflected here. And then after 1970, we see that those figures drastically reduced until today. There is people who is suffering from hunger, but they are, or at least, but there's at least not so many people who are dying from hunger. Also, we have the increase in production, and this has happened in the recent decades. This has brought about a significant reduction in the price of raw materials. There you can see the price of wheat, corn, and you can see how these prices have been reduced until recent years. As you can see that reduction in the price, those are in constant terms, and this has brought about an increase in the consumption of food. This is the increase in consumption of meat in China. Today in China, they consume double the amount of meat that was consumed 50 years ago. And that also changed diets. Diets that were only of carbohydrates became now more related to proteins.
También es
Also,
muy interesante
it's
ver
very interesting to see
qué porcentaje
what
del
percentage
presupuesto
of the
de
budget
una familia
of a
es destinada
household
hoy a la alimentación.
is dedicated to
Y como vemos
food.
en las curvas,
As we can see in these
va
curves,
cayendo
we can
rápidamente
see
el porcentaje destinado
a
a la
lowering
alimentación.
percentage
Es decir,
of what is
hace
spent on
unos,
food.
En 1960,
In
una persona en
1960,
Estados Unidos
a
gastaba
person in the
18%,
USA would spend
ahora está gastando el
18%.
10%
Now they
en
are
otras cosas.
spending
La gente
10% of
empieza a
their
gastar
budget.
más en otras cosas.
People start spending more on other things, entertainment, travel.
Inclusive las curvas de abajo
Even the
muestran
lower curves
cómo,
show
inclusive las familias
how
gastan más en
also
alimentación que en el
families
restaurante,
spend more
no
on food,
necesariamente
but
es
at
una
the
medida
restaurant.
de lo que, digamos, de lo que debe ser. Sin embargo, este es el promedio.
This is the
Cuando vemos en
average.
esta
When we
otra,
look
vemos
at this
separados
other
por
graph,
quintiles de
we
acuerdo
see the quintiles
al nivel de
according to
de salarios que tienen.
the
Vemos que
salaries.
todavía
We still
personas
see
menores
that the
salarios
people who have lower
gastan
salaries
significativo.
spend
Cuando una
significant
persona de alto
amount
salario
on food. So when we
gasta
have a
7%
high income person that spends 7% of their budget on food, a
menores
person
ingresos
with a
gastan
lower
el
income
27%
spends
de
27%
su proporción.
of their
Existe una tendencia
budget
al
on
descenso,
food.
pero
So
todavía
there's a
los más
trend
pobres,
that to see a reduction in this, but lower income people still spend a lot of money on food.
las familias
And this is what the families consume in different parts of the world annually. We could say that man no longer lives to eat, but eats to live. This is something that changed throughout the past centuries. It's the relationship of man with food. And the reason why this is happening very quickly in the recent decades, it has to do with technological convergences that increase production. The first technological convergence is from the 1970s. That is when we see the drop in the deaths because of hunger. It has to do with the green convergence. It's the use of fertilizers, the change in genetics, and the use of chemical controls of plagues and diseases with materials that were developed for the Second World War. So we see these technological advances that came about afterwards, but it also has to do with the claims of the people. In 1960, there was a lot of hunger in India, basically, and the farmers in India went to the streets to protest against the government, asking for fertilizers, asking for support to increase their production. And that's why this scientist, agronomist, Borla, he developed a technological package which resulted in the Nobel Peace Prize. We also see the green industrial revolution. It's not only a green revolution, but it's a green industrial revolution, because after the first convergence, we see developing new technologies like biotechnology, direct tilling. We also see more sophistication in chemical controls, and these come from other technologies, from robotics, IT, metal mechanics, from other technologies that were here before. The products that were obtained with these plants are no longer only food. We have a lot of products now: medicines, textiles, enzymes, industrial products. So we say that these plants, in this case we have a soy plant and a corn plant, but we could include others, they not only produce food, but now more products related to the industry. And these are plants, we could say that they are industrial plants, green plants. They do not use electricity, they use solar energy. Soy is works. These are factories that do not have carbon dioxide. They absorb carbon dioxide. These are industrial plants of the 21st century. We are now seeing this revolution, this green industrial revolution, and now we are heading towards another revolution. We could say that it's about a new convergence, where there's an information revolution of new materials, new ways of organizing and management. And I'll give you an example. There are scientists who are already developing robots that plant seeds with injectors. So there are injectors that put the seed in the right place. Until now, we put the seeds in the soil with special machinery, but these robots can use some injectors, and this would stop the use of tractors or other kinds of machinery that we use today. Today, many people are saying that robots are going to replace humans. I'm saying that they are not only going to replace humans, but also machinery. These are robots that are aimed at precision agronomy. They have information that comes from satellites or drones, and they work with renewable energy through lithium batteries. And they can be manufactured with 3D printers. We do not need a big factory to do this. They can be specially designed and developed in a garage in any part of the world. They use what we call seeds ready to use. It's like where we have a genetics. These seeds are like a warehouse of chips of information that allow us to create different plants. And they are covered by chemical molecules, by microbiological organisms, and other things that allow them to be born and develop. And this is something that might be essential. The air that we breathe, 70% is nitrogen. And we could be capturing nitrogen from the air and transforming it to be available for the plants. And that would reduce the price of fertilizers, and we would increase their efficiency. So this would bring about an agriculture which would be much more efficient and sustainable. If we add the insect and plague control with physical controls replacing chemical substances, we could have an agriculture which could be much more environmentally friendly. We always have to look at transportation efficiency to lower the costs, and different mechanisms that would improve management, such as artificial intelligence, e-commerce, finance. This new technological structure of agriculture could have incredible benefits regarding the carbon footprint, as we do not need mechanization anymore for agronomy because we have the robots. Then we might be able to put the seeds without having to cut the trees down, because the robots could go around the trees planting the seeds. We wouldn't have to cut down any trees anymore. Of course, that must be accompanied by technology. Cell phones allow us to record or to keep in touch or to make decisions at any time, in any place. Another innovation is the changes we are seeing with the types of products. It's not only about innovation with the processes, as I spoke before, but now I'm talking about innovation in the products, like artificial beef, like algae. We could make a photosynthesis in the sea. The sea is a great surface that could become photosynthesis. We
muchas
have
veces más aceites y proteínas
many
que
times they have
nosotros,
more
entre otras cosas. Estos son algunos ejemplos, pero hay
more
muchos
they have better
desarrollos de
substance
productos,
that we have
que hay
in
que
the soy
mirar con
actually.
atención. Esas
These
transformaciones
transformations
no es solo son
are
transformaciones
not
de grandes
only
extensiones
about vast
de zonas
extensions
productivas,
for
sino que hay que pensar que esas
agriculture. We
transformaciones
have to
se
think
dan
about
o se
those
dan en
transformations
todos los lugares, en todas las
happening
geografías,
in every
desde
place,
montes naturales,
from native
la agricultura
forests,
sin suelo, como la
agriculture
hidroponía,
without
es decir, que uno
soil like
podría
hydroponia
independizarse de la calidad del suelo,
could
y
allow
tener
us to
producción
be
vegetal,
independent
y
from
hacer
soil,
fotosíntesis
and we
en
could
las
do
ciudades, o en cualquier
photosynthesis in
lugar,
the cities or
digamos,
anywhere.
inclusive menos aptos. Uno puede hacer agricultura
We
en los
could do
techos
agriculture
de la
on the
casa, ¿no?
roofs
Es
of the
decir,
houses.
llamamos
We call this
agricultura urbana,
urban
o
agriculture
de la
or
derecha son
peri-urban.
campos de algas,
On the right, you can
que
see algae
usan agua de
fields.
mar.
They use seawater.
Bueno, y hay casos, estos
And
son
also,
edificios
these
fotosintéticos.
are
Es decir, hay
photosynthesis
arquitectos que están
buildings.
diseñando
There
como
are
una cuestión
architects
estética,
who are
pero también se
designing
podría
these
pensar
kinds of
como una acción
buildings, looking
productiva,
at the
edificios
aesthetics,
que tienen
but also
tubos
thinking
en
about
donde hay, en
having
este caso, algas,
tubes
y corre
where
el
they
agua,
have algae
van
and water
produciendo
runs
distintos
through them,
tipos
and there
de
they can
productos de
produce
utilidad para el consumo.
products that can be
El
consumed.
tema no es un tema solamente
This is not
tecnológico,
only about
estamos hablando de
technology.
tecnológico. La forma de organizarse
The way that we
es una
get
innovación muy
organized
importante que
is
tiene que ver con
very
la alimentación.
important,
Puede
and
haber
this has to
tecnología,
do
puede
with
producirse
innovation.
alimentos,
We can
pero
have
puede haber
technology
hambre,
to
como lo que
produce
estábamos,
food, but we can
estábamos
still see
mencionando en
hunger.
Yamandú y en
As
Argentina, por
Yamandu
ejemplo,
said, in
un país
Argentina,
que
for
produce
example,
enorme cantidad
it's
de
a
excedentes,
country
sin
that
embargo, hay hambre.
produces a
No es-
surplus
no
of
es
food,
la
but
innovación
anyhow
la que
they
va
have a
la
lot of
forma
hunger.
sistémica, no es un
So
tema
this is not
exclusivamente
exclusively
tecnológico,
technological
tiene que
or
ver con la organización.
production, about production. It has to do with
Desafío a pensar
the organization,
adelante,
how
que
we
la sociedad ya no
organize this.
segmente entre
Society
grandes y chicos,
cannot
o ricos y
segment
pobres,
between big
sino
and
entre
small
los que
and
saben
rich and
organizarse y
poor.
no saben
It's
organizarse.
between those who
Que se
know how to
encuentren
get
los que se dan
organized
cuenta
and those who
y los que no
don't.
se dan
It's
cuenta.
about who realizes things and who doesn't realize the
Distintas,
things.
Formas que se han
Different,
ido desarrollando en los últimos
we've
años.
seen
Cadenas de
recent
valores,
developments like value
redes,
chains, networks,
tercerización, calidad de
outsourcing,
la gestión y
the
demás, y hay que seguir explorando
management
estas
quality,
distintas
and we
formas
have
de
to keep
organización.
exploring
Sin
in all
embargo,
these
el
ways of
costo,
organization.
como se dijo
However,
al
the
principio,
cost
ha
of
sido
this
enorme,
has been
y
very,
sigue
very big,
siendo
and it
enorme los
continues.
desafíos que tenemos por
We continue
delante.
to see a lot of
Desde el punto de vista
challenges
ambiental,
regarding
el
the
tema de la,
environment.
Deforestación,
We see
que hay que
deforestation, we
pararla,
must
la
stop
degradación de
this.
suelos,
We also
ya hay
see
prácticas como la
soil
siembra en bloques que
degradation.
permiten
We see direct
prácticamente
tilling now,
revertir el
which
proceso de
can
degradación
allow
de
us to
suelos,
revert
el
soil
calentamiento global,
degradation.
la
We
pérdida
see
de
global
biodiversidad,
warming,
la
the
contaminación del agua.
loss
El segundo gran
of
desafío tiene que ver con el medio
biodiversity
ambiente.
and
El
water
segundo
quality.
desafío tiene
The
que ver con
second
los
challenge
hábitos de
has
consumo,
to
como ya
do
se
with
mencionaron.
consumption habits.
Este es un gráfico que
This
habla,
is a
cuanto
graph
más
that
verde,
shows
hay más
the greener,
kilocalorías consumidas
the
per
greener the
cápita.
chart, the more
Pero
calories
es
people
impresionante el
consume.
crecimiento
You
que ha
can
habido,
see the growth
en las kilocalorías
in
consumidas.
kilocalories
En
that are
1960
consumed.
norteamericano
In
usaba
1960,
2.7, ahora
it was
consume
1.7,
3.5
now
per
it's
cápita.
3.7 per
Es decir, que
capita
consume
of
prácticamente un
consumption.
30-40% más de
Humans
kilocalorías que las que consumía hace
consume
40 años, son los mismos
3
seres
times
humanos.
more
Y eso tiene
kilocalories
que
than
ver
they
con
did
todo lo que va
before.
alrededor del alimento,
And that has to do with
desperdicio y demás.
everything that surrounds
El
food.
tercer tema son los desperdicios.
Now we have to look at
Hay
waste.
muchos trabajos.
There's a
Este es
lot
uno de ellos,
of
pero en el fondo
research
el
done on
concepto es
waste,
que
but
entre un 20 y un 30%
between
de lo
20 and
producido
30%
se
of what is
desperdicia.
produced goes
Una
to
parte se
waste.
desperdicia en el proceso
Some goes
primario
to
y otra
waste
parte
in
se
the primary
desperdicia
process
en
and
los
the
procesos de
rest
distribución
in the
y
distribution
procesamiento.
and
Medio
processing
ambiente,
methods.
hábitos de consumo,
We have consumption
desperdicio de
habits,
alimentos,
waste of food.
son los grandes desafíos que hay por delante.
These are our big challenges for the future. And
Estamos en una
nearly
zona
finishing, we are located in an area, it's an elected area.
Es una región que si uno lo ve en un
It's a
mapa, es la
region that
zona
if
más
we
verde
look
del
at the
mundo.
map, it's the
Es la
greenest part of the
plataforma
world.
fotosintética,
The photosynthetic
más
platform,
importante que tiene el mundo. Además, hay
it's the
paz.
most important one in the
Es una
world.
región abierta al
It's
mundo,
it's
con
a region
recursos
open
para
to
dar
the
y
world
recibir,
with resources to give and to receive, with a tradition of agriculture and agronomy. There are other areas that don't have this agriculture. Our region, Uruguay, is located in the right place at the right time to help solve these big problems. And that leadership is something that must be assumed. It's not great to be a leader, but it's a commitment. Being a leader is a commitment. It's a challenge. It's not something exclusive. It doesn't bring us peace of mind. It brings us responsibilities. Today, the Mercosur represents a very important percentage of world trade, nearly 60% of soy, corn 40%, beef 32%. We are seeing the growth thanks to Brazil, but the responsibility and the opportunity for Mercosur from now on is very significant. Innovate for food security is not only a technological topic. A few years ago, I had the chance to speak to Marina Silva about the problems of capitalism and how we had to solve them. We made a list of things and we said, okay, maybe let's call it the 21st century capitalism. And I said, no, let's call it sustainabilism. Well, whatever we call it, it's very important that this world that we have ahead of us must have technological convergence. It's a world that requires a commitment with the environment, something that we haven't done correctly. We need to have new organizations. Here I'm talking about the Porosa company. It's a company that is impacted by the society, and it impacts the society. It's a concept that we see with the new ways of organization. Also, the integration between the public sector and the private sector. When we talk about public-private, we always think about the client and the company and the customer. I believe that public and private must be partners. This is much more than a client and the supplier. New institutions, democracy, global governments, trade agreements. We see a lot of critics. We also talked about the Pope. The Pope criticizes. This calls my attention because why doesn't he criticize the state, which is so important or even more important than other sectors? Because the state has the power and the tools for transformation. We must ask more from the state, more facilitation, more presence. Another topic is the new leadership. I'm talking about businessmen, workers. It's not enough to pay taxes. Companies, it's not enough for companies to pay taxes. We must get involved more. And in order to workers, in order to keep their jobs, will have to change their job because the work of the future is not the work that we have today. So in order to keep our employment, we must change jobs. And how do we do this? This is my last point. I think it's the most important one. It's how we include and how do we bring in those people who are excluded? Because in the past, societies were not prepared for the revolutions. But we are not prepared now either for this revolution. We do not understand information societies. So we are not getting prepared. And there's a lot of people who are being excluded. And we're talking about the popular economy and other concepts that appear. So lastly, why?
¿Para qué hacemos todo eso? ¿Cuál es el
Why are we
propósito
doing this? What's the
de
purpose
todos estos desarrollos,
of all
reflexiones
these
y demás?
developments and
Amartya
talks?
Sen, que fue
Amartya
premio
Sen,
Nobel
he
en
was a Nobel
Economía,
Prize winner of economy.
decía
He
que el
said
sentido,
that
para el hombre
the-
era crear
for man,
capacidades que lo hagan feliz.
man wanted to create capacities that would make him happy. So what are those capacities? For example, being free, being
Por ejemplo,
autonomous,
ser empleable,
being
ser
employable,
emprendedor,
being an
ser
entrepreneur,
solidario,
being
ser
have
saludable.
solidarity, being healthy.
Entonces, propongo
So I
hacer una
propose,
especie de chequeo.
let's do
Cada
a
vez que
checklist.
decidimos algo,
Every time we
proponemos
decide on
algo,
something or
o
we
hacemos algo,
propose
hacer un
something,
chequeo para
let's
ver
do
si
a
lo que estamos
checklist.
haciendo
Let's see if what we are doing
hace a las personas más libres,
makes
hace a las
people
personas
more
más
free,
autónomas,
more autonomous,
hace a las personas más
if it makes
saludables,
people healthier,
y así estaremos dando respuesta
and that
al
way we can
sentido de todo esto que
give
proponemos.
all of this
Muchas
a
gracias.
good sense. Thank you.
Gracias, Gustavo.
Thank you, Gustavo.
Los uruguayos sabemos
Uruguayans know
ha significado Australia
what
para
Australia
gente
has
que emigró,
meant for
para
people
uruguayos que
who
emigraron para allá
immigrated
por
to
los 70 y
Australia,
después,
Uruguayans who went there back in the
y ha
70s,
sido incluso
and
noticia
also it's
en la
been
pandemia, por
news
ejemplo,
during
del
the
Uruguay hacia el
pandemic
mundo,
from Uruguay to the world,
nuestra actitud hacia el fenómeno o lo que ocurrió con el Greg Mortimer,
behavior to the world, what
como
happened
que,
with
a
the
pesar de
Greg
la
Mortimer
distancia y las
ship,
horas de vuelo
because
que
in
llevan
spite of the very long
hasta ahí
hours
o venir hasta acá,
to get there or to come here,
hay una relación que
there's
deberíamos
a relationship
revisar y
that we should
fortalecer.
strengthen.
El gobierno de Victoria,
The government
estado de
of
Victoria,
the state of Victoria
en Australia,
in Australia
ha decidido o ha
has
resuelto una estrategia
decided
sur-sur,
a
Incluso tiene un
south-south
nombre,
strategy. It even has a
globally
name,
connected,
globally connected.
y que tiene en la persona
And it has
de
in the
Herman
person,
Spangenberg,
in Herman Spangenberg,
uno de los referentes fundamentales.
one
Yo
of the
empecé a leer
main
hace tiempo, cuando me
references.
dijeron, deberíamos conocer a ese uruguayo.
When they told me we have to meet this
pero que tiene mucho
Uruguayan
para
who
aportar.
left our country a long time ago, but he has so much to give
Spangenberg
us. Herman
No solo vivió en Australia,
did
también
not only
recorrió el
live in
mundo, pero
Australia,
hoy
but
es una
he's
referencia
been around the world, and
en lo que
he's
es el manejo,
a
el trabajo
reference,
de la
a world
genómica,
reference
la
when we come
genética,
to genomics,
vinculado a la- fundamentalmente a la
genetics,
salud
especially
vegetal
with
y
regards
animal.
to vegetable
Y
and
ha
animal
decidido
health. And he
desde
has decided
su gobierno de Victoria
from
incluso,
the government of
establecer una
Victoria
relación con Uruguay,
to
más concretamente con
establish
Canelones,
a relationship with
donde,
Uruguay, especially in particular with
le
Canelones.
hemos pedido la
And we
posibilidad de que
have
nos apoye
asked him to support us
con el Polo Científico y Tecnológico de Pando, por
with
ejemplo,
the
donde está haciendo
Polo
mucha
Científico and
investigación.
Tecnológico of Pando
Pero,
that's undergoing a lot of
Sin duda,
research.
necesitamos
And,
el apoyo
but of course we need the
gente como
support
Germán.
of people like Herman,
que es referencia en el mundo y que de
because
repente
he's
los
a
uruguayos
world reference,
no tenemos
and
tan claro.
maybe
Así que,
Uruguayans don't know as much as he
sin más,
does. So
Les dejo a ustedes
let's
con
give the floor
este uruguayo
to Germán.
australiano
He's a
que viene
Uruguayan
ahora a
Australian
apoyar o a
who's
analizar
here
la posibilidad de
to
que
see
Uruguay
the opportunity or the
en esa
chance of
estrategia
Uruguay
de globally
heading
connected,
towards this globally connected
estrategia
strategy,
de poder
south-south
resolver acá
strategy,
en Canelones,
in order to solve in
Departamento Productor de
Canelones,
Alimentos,
the
alguna de las
food
claves
producer
para
department,
ser mejores productores,
some of the
a su vez,
keys to be
para
better
democratizar
farmers,
más
better
el tema del
producers,
conocimiento.
and also to have
Una
better
presentación
knowledge. Let's
bastante más exacta, más ajustada
listen
de quién
a
es,
little bit more about the background of Herman,
que viene de
our
tan lejos,
visitor, who's coming from so far away, but he's here back in his country land.
Hermann Spangenberg.
Hermann Spangenberg is an agronomist from the University of the Republic. He obtained a postgraduate degree at the Max Planck Institute in Germany and carried out a postdoctoral research in Switzerland. He was a professor at ETH Zurich, where he obtained his PhD in science in agrobiotechnology, and at Agriculture Victoria in Melbourne, Australia. He has held positions as Director of Plant Genetics and Genomics Research, Chief Scientist of the Plant Molecular Breeding Cooperative Research Center and the Dairy Futures Cooperative Research Center. He's director of Dairy Buy-in and director of Dairy Feed Base. He was the director of Agriculture, Victoria Research, professor of plant genetics and genomics, and director of the School of Applied Systems Biology at La Trobe University. He was director of the Agri-Bio Center for Agri-Bioscience. Some of his awards and honors: Emeritus Professor of La Trobe University, member of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, former president of the International Plant Biotechnology Association, and he received the Australian Thinker of the Year Award and the Public Service Medal for his outstanding public service through scientific research programs in the agricultural sector in Victoria. Thank you very much, Shamandu. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be back home. Science and technology have always been at the core of the human development of food production. We are living in a time of discovery like never before. Many of those discoveries, especially those that have to do with genomics technology, are finding today applications not only in agriculture for food production, but also in the industry and in health. And they are contributing to food security in a changing environment. It's very important to say that they are preparing us for the challenge of satisfying a global demand that will grow from 35 to 56% by 2050. So with that in mind, the industry in Australia has developed a strategic plan to grow the sector of agriculture, forestry, and fisheries to have a value of $100 million by 2030. And the starting point of this situation at the beginning of the decade, it's a total value of $71 billion. If we continue with the same trajectory as in the last decade, the growth of 1.5% annually, we would reach 2030 with a total value of $83 billion. That means that we must double the rate growth per year in what's left of the decade, from 1.5% to 3% annually, in order to reach that objective, which is quite ambitious, but it's achievable. All of this is important because we must consider the real impact of climate change in the Australian agriculture area. These maps of Australia show the maximum temperatures since 1910 until today, and we can see an increase in the maximum temperature by 1 degree centigrade in the last 3 decades, and also a reduction of 28% of rainfall during the growth of wheat plants. And that means that in the last 3 decades, we've seen a reduction of 27% of potential returns of wheat. In spite of this, given the development and adoption of technology that have compensated this reduction of the yield, this has allowed us to continue this trajectory of 1.5% of annual growth. I would like to share 5 innovations in agrobioscience from Australian scientists in Victoria, Australia. And they are building, transforming, and contributing to food security context. One is genomics applied to accelerate scientific improvement. 2 is applied genomics for adaptation to climate change. 3 is genomics applied to mitigate emissions, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 4 is genomics to reduce inputs and expenses, also emissions. And 5, it's genomics in an agrobio industry with an objective of contributing to public health. The first is the invention of genomic selection. This is a technology that does not involve genetics technology. It allows us to double the genetics gains, sometimes to multiply it by 5. And we could have a new trajectory trying to double the annual rate growth that we saw in the last decade, given the adoption and development of technologies. This technology is making a revolution of genetics in food and animal health. We use for genetics improvement in grains, wheat, barley. We have here for pastures, for milk cows, beef cows, also industries, more recent industries, such as cannabis for medicine purposes. The second example is about that narrative of the increase in temperatures that we've seen. I'm going to give you an example regarding dairy farms. We have about 100 and 120 days when cows are exposed to heat stress. This is in Australia. We have 4 consecutive days of heat, reduces 40% of milk production, and a reduction of 10% of milk in the rest of for the cows. So in this scenario, we see a loss of 40 billion liters of milk. So scientists in Victoria applied capacities to connect data with bio-IT, different information of data. They put them together. They developed the first genomic breeding values. They connected millions of records of information regarding temperature and humidity in 150 meteorological stations around Australia, connecting that with millions of production records of milk, of thousands and thousands of cows, with 3.5 billion of variations and molecular indicators of DNA, a very large number of genotypes, and we developed the first genomic breeding values in the world for the tolerance of heat in milk production. The dairy farmers in Australia have access through their smartphones to all of this. The third example is about the greenhouse emissions. Not only adaptation, as I said, adaptation to heat, but also to reduce emissions. And in one farm, in a dairy farm in Australia, 60% of the emissions are from methane. One way of reducing the carbon footprint of milk is applying genetics improvements, including genomics, and that allowed us to develop these millions of liters of milk, and last year more than 9 billion liters of milk. And that is all done with the same amount of animals. So the intensity of methane, a number of methane produced by liter of milk is 33 grams of methane in 1980, and today it's 20 grams of methane. That means that we reduced 40% in the carbon footprint in the milk that Australia exports. The fourth example is not only to consider the intensity of methane, but also the total production of methane, and also the reduction of production expenses. So a new genomic figure for improvement, the first time in the world that we developed this was what we called the feed safe. Food safe. And this allows us to choose animals that will produce the same amount of milk, consuming less food. So the reduction of food per year and per cow is 100 kilograms of dry materials. And if we apply genomics to improve the survival in the herd and also to reduce 34% in the production of methane and a reduction of 46% in the intensity of methane. Fifth example is considering a very important threat that we have, which is the antimicrobe resistance, especially bacteria that have become resistant to antibiotics. In 2019, before the pandemic, all around the world, we had 1.3 million deaths because of resistance to these microbiotics, and a lot of deaths regarding antimicrobial resistance. Nearly more important than any other diseases, because it's much more mortal, much more lethal. So what we did was apply a comparative genome with different mammals that we have in Australia. We have a marsupial there, we have a kangaroo and a platypus. So you must be wondering, what is he talking about? But, well, this is what it is. This is the experiment that we had. We have here a wallaby. He's born with an embryo with absolute dependence from mother's milk. It does not have an immune system developed when he is born, and he is exposed to pathogens from the marsupials. So the mother's milk has components that have the capacity to complement and to fight the microbiotics. And when we compare genomes from the platypus, the kangaroo, and the possum, we found 14 genes that are antimicrobiotics, and 8 of these come in the platypus. We see a great diversity. This has happened throughout more than 11 billion years. This has been the evolution. And we've seen that we have lost a lot of diversity in all of this time. One of the most powerful we call the Pepto Wallaby Microbiotics 1. It is resistant to multiple antibiotics. It's even more powerful. It's 12 times more powerful than ampicillin, 10 times more powerful than tetracycline, and 26 times more powerful than chloramphenicol. So, if we have the chance to use these peptides in an agro industry, we can contribute not only to animal health, but also to public health. These examples that I gave you have to do to increase value and reduce expenses. This is something that Mario also mentioned, and it's the food waste that we have in societies. In Australia, we lose 7.3 million tons. We have 7.3 million tons of food waste. That's what we have in Australia. And if we look at this throughout the supply chain, 34 of these are household waste, 31% is primary waste, and 34% is manufacture. So as consumers, we play a very important role to fight against this problem. We also had more than 5 million Australians who suffered from food insecurity in the past 12 months of the pandemic. So, apart from the agricultural plan for 2030, to increase the production of agriculture, fisheries, and we have a plan for 2030 that has the objective to be socially unacceptable to have waste of food. We have to reduce the waste. We must maximize the value of raw materials and natural resources, and also reduce the environmental impacts of production of food and also of waste management. And that has a very important logic with regards to economy. We could have an opportunity of having 25 billion Australian dollars of value added. And I will finish with 3 comments regarding opportunities in the application of agrobioscience in Uruguay. One is to genomize all the improvement programs for animal and vegetable genetics, applying in a routinely way these genomics. 2 is to establish a framework and the capacity to have big data analytics that will allow us to have a synergy. There are databases that are diverse, and we have dispersed sources so that we can carry out these activities, as I said in number 1, and also to accelerate the development and implementation of precision agriculture. And 3, to relate biophysical models of the growth of harvests and also connect them with genomic predictions of activity 1 and thus facilitate the development of predictive agriculture. Thank you.
Gracias, Germán.
Thank you, Germán.
Da para imaginarnos y para hacer muchas preguntas.
We could ask many questions.
No hace muchos días,
Not long ago, I went to President Mujica's farm to talk about some political matters, and I must acknowledge that 70 or 80% of our conversation was about paspalo. He wanted me to learn what paspalo was. And every time that I have to talk with someone who's a political reference, for me, we end up talking about biology, or rather learning about biology. So apart from his role as a leader and a political reference, he has that love and enthusiasm for these other topics. So we considered in Canelones that it was very important to include, after these speakers talking about the company, the research, we would like to have a word from Pepe Mujica about this topic. Because I'm old,
Tengo que felicitar al pueblo de Canelones
I want to congratulate the people of Canelones. I want to congratulate its
por el
government
tipo de preocupación
for
intelectual
the intellectual concern
que le plantean
that you
a
have
la
raised,
sociedad que vivimos.
to society.
Soy absolutamente consciente
I am
que no
aware
estamos en una época
that we are
de
not
muchos cambios,
living a time of great
sino que
changes. We are
entrando
rather
aceleradamente en un cambio de época,
going very quickly into a new age
donde si hasta hoy el capital fue
where
importantísimo,
until now capital was very important, but every day more it will become,
conocimiento.
knowledge will become more important.
Conocimiento como herramienta
Knowledge as a
en la
tool
masa del pueblo que trabaja.
for the workers.
Lo que implica que tenemos como nación un desafío.
We have a challenge
Todos los
as a nation,
latinoamericanos.
and all Latin Americas.
Corremos riesgos de
All
quedar
Latin
en un montón
Americans
de los
might be
irrelevantes
left behind. We may
que no sirven
become
ni para que
irrelevant.
nos exploten,
We might be
o somos
exploited
capaces de dar un salto
unless we take a
y
leap
meter una fortuna en la cabeza de nuestros hijos, de
and
nuestros
we give knowledge to our children, to our grandchildren,
nietos. El mundo
for them
desarrollado
to be up to date with
ha
what will
sacado
come.
una enorme ventaja
There's another world that
en lo que
has
significan las
taken,
vertientes del conocimiento.
that is very far ahead in with regards to knowledge.
Cuando escuchaba,
And today, when I was listening
no hay cosa más explosiva,
to our
no hay
speakers,
deporte de riqueza más
there's
importante,
no greater
la
richness
biología.
or wealth than biology.
porque las ciencias de la vida
Because
son
life
inagotables.
sciences never end.
Estamos apenas rascando.
We are only just
Allí están
scratching
todos
the
los
start.
desafíos.
There we can find
Todas las
all the
respuestas.
challenges and all the
El compañero
answers.
hablaba del paspalo.
Here,
Paspalo no es
my
una
friend was talking
ramilla,
about paspalo.
es un pasto
Paspalo is grass.
bastante común
It's a quite common grass
de nuestros campos, pero en
in
América
our
Latina
fields.
hay variedades
But
de
in Latin
paspalo.
America, there's a large variety of paspalo
Como excepción que hacen simbiosis.
that, as an exemption, do symbiosis.
Con sus aliados, nitrógeno del aire.
And they take nitrogen from the
por lo
air.
tanto, incorporan,
So
digamos, urea
they
al
put
suelo,
urea on
en
the
condiciones
soil
venenosas. Eso es
in-
revolucionario.
in less threatening
La genómica
conditions,
del
and that's
futuro es
revolutionary.
capaz
If the
de
future
trasladar
genomics
esas
can
propiedades
take those
a otras gramíneas
properties and put them on
importantes
other
como el
soil,
trigo, como el maíz.
and important things like wheat
Por
or
eso,
corn,
la investigación
that's why
científica
scientific
al servicio del
research
trabajo humano
at
debe
the
ser un
service
nervio
of workers
olímpico
must
de
be a
orientación de una
political
nación.
decision. It must be a guideline for a nation.
Allí están,
That is where
esperando los secretos de la naturaleza
the secrets of nature lie.
y para auxiliarnos.
They are there to
Todavía
help
no
us.
sabemos lo que
We
pasa
still don't know what's happening
en la función más importante
in the
de la
most
Tierra,
important
la
function
fotosíntesis.
above the
Sabemos de un
surface of
paquete
the
de
earth,
reacciones iniciales y
photosynthesis.
otras finales.
We know what happens at the beginning and at the end, but we don't know what happens in the
La
middle.
función biológica
And
más
the
importante
biological
que hay arriba de la
function
Tierra
that's on
es
top
la
of the
mantener
soil,
todo.
because it keeps us
Y así
all
podría
alive.
seguir contando
And I could
anécdotas.
keep on telling you stories.
En
What
materia de antibióticos de los marsupiales,
what our panelists has just talked about the
en la cabeza. ¿Por
antibiotics.
qué nuestras comadrejas
Why don't our
comen solo la cabeza de los pollos?
Why do the raccoons here only eat the heads of the chicken and the hens and leave the rest of the body there? What are they looking for? They are marsupials also.
¿Qué quiero trasladar? Una responsabilidad política.
This is a political responsibility.
Ponemos recursos al servicio
We put
de la
resources
investigación
at the
biológica
service of biological research
como un elemento de desarrollo.
as a development element of this country.
Miramos hacia el interior.
We look towards the
Cambiamos nuestras
interior.
rutinas fiscales
We change
y nos
our tax
atrevemos
routines
a ese pecado
and
para los
we
economistas
are a sin for the economists. We are putting taxes to strengthen research, biological research, because this must be a priority. How can we explain that we are the country with the largest livestock in percentage? We do not say, we're not discussing the stress. We're not talking about the heat stress that's happening on cows, and they lose weight because of their stress, and we are heading towards a very, very hot world. So we really need to assure places of shade for the cows in the summer, and we must ensure 1 or 2 or 3% of livestock land that we can irrigate. Sorghum, when we need it, because the characteristics of climate change are that the adverse phenomena will become more intense every year and more frequent. So, in a country like ours, in a country that has history with livestock, this is a topic that must be discussed at national level. And we have to talk about the racial composition. I do not want to take a leap to genomics, but at least we have to talk about the mix of breeds, Bradford, and adaptation. We should be discussing why, because the heat is just around the corner. The knowledge, the technical knowledge and scientific knowledge must come from political guidelines. These must be the priorities of the government. And piece of advice to youth is for youth to study. Study as much as you can. Include biology in your studies. It's a poem of life. You are the workers of the future. We, as a small nation, in the last reserve, in the last food reserve that's left for humanity, and it's called Mercosur, we must look at the interests of the region and of humanity. But we need to explain that efficiently to our people. We must look at our tax policies, our alliances. What's the knowledge that we have? What should we specialize in? Where should we invest? Where should we look? We cannot continue taking out. We must invest in the interior of the country, because we need to go to the interior of the country. We must create more value in less time, but for that, the future of agriculture is very different from what we know now. The future agriculture will have knowledge. They will have a lot of research. There is nothing to do with routine, because there's a permanent light on knowledge. But the activities of the earth, although there are many generalities applied everywhere, it needs the on-site relationship in every place, and that has to be done by those who work. I repeat, we have to talk about tax policies, priorities. What are the main axes of the education
¿Cuál
of the
debe ser el
future?
compromiso
What is the commitment
fundamental de nuestra nación?
of our nation?
Es por lo tanto la
Therefore,
ilustración científica que nos han brindado los amigos.
thank you to our friends who have shown us so much science today. And now we have to make our conclusions
Como sociedad.
to work together
Felicito a
as a
Canelones,
society. I congratulate Canelones and its mayor,
fundamentalmente al pueblo canario.
and also to the people of Canelones.
Un abrazo. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Dan ganas de seguir horas.
I feel like staying here for hours and doing more
A las
research.
mujeres rurales de Canelones,
For the rural
vaya
women of
nuestra
Canelones,
felicitación. Fue
we
el día de ayer,
congratulate you. It was
el Día de la
yesterday.
Mujer Rural en
Yesterday we celebrated Rural Women's Day in Uruguay.
A nuestra ciudadanía canaria,
To our people of
anuncio
Canelones,
de que esto recién
I want to
empieza,
tell
estos
you
temas recién
that this is only the start.
empiezan. Y ahí, en alguna de las presentaciones, algunos
And in
conceptos que nos desafían.
A presentation, you saw some of the
Agronegocio
challenges
y
that we have to
agricultura
talk.
familiar. Y
Agribusiness,
por ahí, hablar de
family farms.
déficit
Sometimes we can talk
de
about a
alimentos
deficit of
y
food
exceso
and a
o desperdicio.
surplus of waste.
Hemos hablado siempre
We've
de
talked about
Mario Lubenki,
Mario
hasta ahora,
Lubenki
esa contradicción
and that contradiction of
cuánta investigación, por
how
cuánta
much
gente que
research, but
no
how
tiene para llevar su
many
plato de comida a
people
su casa.
can't put
Muchísimas
food on the
gracias.
table.
Continuamos hablando
So
de estas
thank you
cosas.
very much.
Muchas
We'll keep
gracias por
talking
venir,
about
que
all of this. Thank you
me
very
mandan
much
tan lejos.
for coming from
Gracias,
so far
Gustavo.
away.
Quizás
Thank you,
sos de
Gustavo.
nuestro aquí en
Your
Uruguay.
hours
Y
here in
gracias, Pepe,
Uruguay, and
por
thank you,
seguir
Pepe,
ayudándonos
for
a seguir
always
pensando en
helping
esto.
us to keep
Gracias
thinking
a todos.
about our country. Thank you, everybody.